Woodrow Wilson.
Very complicated man. His complexities, his contradictions are what make him so interesting to study. He was progressive, and yet he wasn't. We think of him as a leader of the progressive movement mostly because he was the president at the peak of the progressive era, and several of his ideas were quite in accord with what modern progressives can easily embrace. But the things that he also stood for, whether we like it or not, fly in the face of today's progressive ideals. They make us ask, how can this be? How can all of this inhere in one man? Makes him the source of endless fascination and study.
So joining us now on Open Book is Christopher Cox. He is a scholar, lawyer. He's a former chair of the Homeland Security Committee. And of course, he was chairman and commissioner of the SEC during the Bush administration. The book's title is Woodrow Wilson, The Light Withdrawn. And I have read a couple of Wilson books, including Scott Berg's book, Chris. I thought this was the most insightful of the three that I've read. And so congratulations on the book. And
Thank you.
For people that really don't know Woodrow Wilson lives, does he not, Mr. Cox? Woodrow Wilson is still with us today, 100 plus years later. Am I right or wrong?
I think that's absolutely spot on. His two terms from 1913 to 1920 were an incredibly important period in the history of the country and the history of the world, but his presidency is influential still today for two reasons: what he himself did with the power he had and what was happening in the world around him. If you want to understand World War II or the Cold War that followed, and today's ongoing wars in the Middle East, and the running debate over America's chosen role as global superpower, all of these things, the Wilson years are the fountainhead. And of course, the book gets into things such as how Jim Crow erupted in the 20th century long after Reconstruction.
Hey everyone, it's Anthony Scaramucci here with some straight talk. Let me tell you, we've got 85% of our viewers who haven't hit the subscribe button yet. What's up with that? It hurts. Listen, I made my career by going all in. Right now, only 15% of our viewers are part of our subscribed family. So please take action. This helps us book more amazing guests. Hit subscribe, join our community, and let's turn these numbers upside down. Now back to the show.
Yeah.
That's another study the Wilson years. Yeah,
sort of a little bit of a stain on his legacy, but I want to go back to you for a second because I find your career fascinating. If you don't mind, I have followed your career. I'm on Wall Street now for 35 years, less my fiasco with Trump, and you've always been a steady hand, Mr. Cox. You've always been somebody that people look to and say, okay, if he was in charge of the SEC, the right thing is going to get done. Talk a little bit about your career for a second and why you decided to write this book. So what did you do prior to the SEC, Chris, and why did you decide to write the book?
Immediately prior, I served in the U.S. House of Representatives for 17 years, 9 terms, and in the middle of the ninth, that's when I was appointed to the SEC. My time in Congress really is one of the reasons that I was so interested in writing about women's suffrage and Woodrow Wilson the way I have in this book, because the passage of the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, really over the longstanding objections of Woodrow Wilson, was a great triumph for the institution of Congress. And the way that women got the vote, and even more importantly, why it took so darn long, was something that had interested me all the way back in law school. It was the very first subject I wrote on at the Harvard Law Review. There had been a recent Supreme Court case, the very first to decide that the 14th Amendment's equal protection guarantee applied to sex discrimination, what we now call gender discrimination. And that same summer, when I was still a law student, I had a conversation with my grandmother, and I asked her, what was the first presidential election you voted in? And she looked at me sort of crosswise. She said, 1920, that was the first time we could vote. And I realized that there was a little bit of ignorance in my understanding of this. But more to the point, I realized I was sitting next to somebody who I'd grown up with, known all my life, an adult, who for a significant part of her lifetime was by law prevented from being an American citizen. How could this take so long in the 20th century? And so that really inspired me, throughout my my working career to explore this. And when I had time to do it in greater depth after I retired from law practice a dozen years after leaving government, this book was the result.
So this is a fascinating man. He's a brilliant man. He's a man of letters. He's an academic. He's a researcher. He's incredibly thoughtful. He's a great writer. He's a globalist. He's an idealist, but he's also a racist. And he's also a little bit of a misogynist. Obviously, he didn't want the women to vote. Some of it's related to his background, and some of it's actually related to him himself, which you write beautifully about. So tell us about this man, Woodrow Wilson, and his rise to power. And Teddy Roosevelt's involved with this as well, right? I mean, Teddy Roosevelt's involved with this man's rise to power as well.
There's no question. And the two of them were friends before they were frenemies and then enemies. The rise of Woodrow Wilson was meteoric. His move from academia to politics having taken place in just a really 2-year period. He went from being president of Princeton University in 1910 to winning the presidential election in 1912. And he was elected governor of New Jersey in 1910, served half a term before making the leap to the White House. That really was unprecedented in American history. He was a supernova. And how did this come about? It came about because Woodrow Wilson had devoted himself to building a public persona over a period of many years. He had published books that were aimed not at an academic audience, but at a popular audience. Harper and Brothers published them, and the editor, the owner of Harper and Brothers, sponsored him effectively and publicized him through Harper's Weekly, through other publications that group controlled, so that well before he actually made the leap to politics, he had a base. And he was also advantaged by being a Southerner. Southerners had been kept out of politics since the Civil War. Southern Democrats were very much chafing at the bit to get back into power. And he was a man of the South. He had been born in Virginia, raised in Georgia, then moved to South Carolina and then North Carolina, attempted to practice law unsuccessfully in Georgia following that. Really didn't become a northern domiciliary until he was 28 years old. He had moved back with his parents during academic breaks throughout all the time that he was studying at the College of New Jersey and at Johns Hopkins. And so Wilson, being a Southerner, made him very attractive in the 1912 Democratic National Convention when the Southerners were exercising their implicit veto over who the Democratic nominee was. That was something in the Democratic Convention rules that dated back to slavery time, giving the Southerners a veto. You needed 2/3. And so the man who had gotten the majority on dozens of successive ballots, the Speaker of the House, Champ Clark, found himself, just cast adrift as they looked for a compromise candidate. And here's this man who had been governor of New Jersey, had been president of a New Jersey university, was known to people in the Northeast. It wasn't their favorite, but he was not objectionable. He was a known quantity, and people in the South claimed him as his own. So he was the perfect compromise candidate. And in the general election that year, he has the great fortune of facing off against not one, but two Republican presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, as you mentioned, who bolted the Republican convention that year after just narrowly losing out on the nomination to the incumbent William Howard Taft. So we've got both Taft and Roosevelt on the ballot. Wilson skates into the White House with 42% of the vote when the two Republicans take a majority of the popular vote. And there he is. So quite a remarkable move from academia and relative obscurity to President of the United States.
So I have a theory. I think you more or less synthesize this theory in your book. Hear me out for a second. I'd like you to react to this. So Wilson has a view of the world. He has America in this benevolent position couple of things he does on his watch. We have the income tax introduction, which strengthens the federal government. We have the Federal Reserve, a couple of failed central banks prior to that, but now we have the Federal Reserve, which gets off under his watch as well. And so these are two things that have been with us now for 100 plus years, which is, in my mind, is larger than life, the American government in terms of its scale and power. But then he also appoints a gentleman by the name of Franklin Roosevelt, who becomes the Assistant Secretary of the Navy under Wilson. And obviously he goes on to win the Second World War, just almost wins the Second World War prior to his death, et cetera. But I guess, tell me about Wilson the visionary, and tell me about Wilson's puzzle piece in the American century, Chris.
So Wilson the visionary brings to mind for most people Wilson and the League of Nations. That was his, ultimate Shangri-La, if you will. It's what he chased throughout his second term as president. It was his ambition as the result of the peace in World War I. And it was a failure in the sense that he could not get the United States, his own country, to sign on to it. He ultimately really killed his own creation because being very stubborn at the end, and this is after his stroke, which really did influence his personality, and he was natively stubborn but became much more so as a result of the terrible calamity that he suffered medically. So in this, more than characteristic stubbornness at the end of his second term, he instructs Democrats in the Senate against the advice of his supporters and leaders of the Senate Democrats to reject any compromise with Republicans who were then in the majority and to vote down the Versailles Treaty and the League of Nations Charter with any reservations whatsoever. He didn't want any reservations to the treaty. And that is the reason that Democrats who supported the treaty, following his wishes, voted against it. The United States could have been a founding member of the League of Nations. The treaty would have been approved by the Senate, but Wilson ultimately destroyed his own creation. So it's part of the Wilson legend, if you will, the Wilson story, that not only did he suffer physically this tragic end to his presidency that left him a shadow of his former self, but he lost the one thing, the one vision that he had for America and the world. He believed that the League of Nations, were it properly established, would prevent all future wars. And he predicted we would have war without it. And of course, that's a much safer prediction with or without the League of Nations, because abolishing war from the planet is truly visionary and probably impractical.
So us not being, the United States not being in the League of Nations contributed to the rise of fascism, contributed to the rise of the Second World War. What's your opinion of that?
Well, I think the connection is a little more subtle. Remember Wilson's 14 points, which were the rest of his vision. The 14th point was the League of Nations. But peace without victory was one of his themes. He did not want an oppressive peace. And that is what he was trying to sell to the Europeans. The Europeans, of course, this was not their first war. And their wars were for territory, and they had colonies. They were imperialists. And so, ultimately what shook out was a settlement very much like all the previous settlements of European wars. Wilson stood his ground about halfway through the proceedings in Paris, but ultimately decided to put all of his eggs in the League of Nations basket. And those with whom he was negotiating understood that what they had to do was make a concession to Wilson on the League, and in return they could get the scrap of territory that they were after, or the particular spoils that the 14 points would otherwise have outlawed. And the treaty, as a result, was oppressive. It was plenty of fodder for a guy writing from his prison cell who created Mein Kampf really around the Versailles Treaty and around his unremitting racism and anti-Semitism. But that oppressive nature of the Versailles Treaty, which did give rise to World War II, no question, had its origins in Wilson's preference for negotiating for the League of Nations.
He, one of the things that struck me about the book was Wilson. He wanted more presidential power. I guess most presidents do, right? It was, we often talk about Nixon having an imperial presidency, but he wanted to expand the powers of the executive branch. Tell us a little bit how he did that. And then if you don't mind, compare that to today's contemporary presidency, whether it's President Biden or President Trump. How are they flexing and using presidential power that's different, let's say, than what the founders had originally intended?
So Wilson came to his early views about the structure of the American government and the relative roles of the president and presidency, Congress and the judiciary, when he was a senior at the College of New Jersey. He wrote a paper, not very long paper, and almost no original research whatsoever. He had never visited Congress before he wrote about it, but he wrote this paper called Cabinet Government, and in it he proposed a much more powerful presidency, a presidency that would borrow from the parliamentary system in the UK by giving the president the power to appoint chairs of committees in Congress, to control the introduction of legislation, and to be a participant himself in legislation, and even to rule out, other means of the passage of legislation. So the president would really control this. The reason that Wilson came up with this idea is that he was bridling under the oppressive Republican Congresses who had forced Black voters on the South. He wrote about this as a student. He wrote about it as an academic for decades afterward. He wrote about it all the way through his presidency of Princeton. The white men of the South were the natural leaders, and forcing the rule of Black people on the white men of the South, humiliated them and destroyed Southern civilization. He wrote, virtually those words repeatedly. If Andrew Johnson's vetoes of Reconstruction, which Wilson did not like, had been sustained, then there would have been no Reconstruction. So it was the domineering Republican Congress and the weak, not that Andrew Johnson he thought was weak, but the weak position that Andrew Johnson had that he was trying to correct. And he later then expanded on this in a book called Constitutional Government. And it was a theme of his, throughout his academic time. I think that he backed off this rather demurely years later after his brief time as New Jersey governor and when he entered the White House. For this reason, his arrival in Washington, D.C. coincided with Southern Democrats taking control of virtually everything in Washington. And so there was no longer any need for the significant structural changes that he was talking about. So he stopped preaching that idea explicitly. But as you say, he never gave up on the idea of really an imperial presidency, one in which the legislature is subservient to the president. He treated Congress that way. He refused to call them into session when Republicans took over. And back then you could do that for more than a year. So he prevented Congress from operating at a time after World War I when there were many, many things that needed to be taken care of. But he refused to call them into session. He would show up, virtually unannounced, tell Congress, I'm going to be there in a few hours to come and address them. Did not give even the courtesy of a little bit of advance notice. He really thought of Congress as his vassal, and that high-handed approach to Congress, ultimately became an exploding cigar for him when he lost his majorities in the House and in the Senate towards the end of his presidency. So to compare that to today, we are the heirs to all of this, and we've had an accretion of presidential power over the 20th and first 3 decades now of the 21st century through statute. When I worked in the White House counsel's office as a lawyer for President Reagan, you're essentially practicing constitutional law. And when people ask questions, can the president do this? Can the president do that? You start with the specific enumerated powers in the Constitution, but that if you're looking for presidential power these days, you go beyond the Constitution to the statute books, because if it's not expressly delegated to the president, then the only other possibility is that Congress used its power to give the president this authority. And these authorities have really accumulated over the decades, so that even if a new president, following President Trump or following President Biden, were to take office and have a very different attitude and wanted to put, Humpty Dumpty back together again, let's say, it would be very difficult because there's so much that lays at the president's feet. It's difficult to ignore for any president.
So let's talk about, I'm going to say something. I want you to either disagree or agree with me. I see him as the father of the American century. I see him as the precursor to what ultimately happens after the Second World War. Am I right about that, or am I wrong about that?
Well, I think you're right about that in more ways than just international relations and war and peace, because his legacy on race, on sex discrimination, and so on, also is with us. It is the reason that we hear people today talking about systemic racism. The systemic part was, government regulation, government laws, government expressed discrimination. And Woodrow Wilson was an outlier. He came after 50 years of improvement after the Civil War and segregated the federal government. He stood athwart the Susan B. Anthony Amendment for most of his time as president for one specific reason, and that is he did not want federal enforcement of black women's voting rights in Jim Crow states where Democratic control depended on their ability to have white people vote. So only. And he actually expressed this in a private meeting with Elizabeth Cady Stanton's daughter, as it happened, who recorded it. She was a lifelong Democrat who had been accorded a meeting with Wilson, along with 3 other Democratic women in the 1916 election, just before Election Day. Wilson was explaining to them the politics of women's suffrage. He thought he had a friendly Democratic group, and he said, Mrs. Blatch, her name was Harriet Stanton Blatch, let me assure you that states' rights, which had been the reason he'd been giving for opposing the Anthony Amendment and its federal enforcement, states' rights is not the reason that I and my party oppose this. It is the Negro question. That is why we oppose it. And he pointed out that in 2 states, black voters had a majority, and this, of course, was intolerable. And that is why we could not have the Anthony Amendment. The Birth of a Nation fiasco, of course, is popularly well known, although the many details of it are not, which I explore in the book. His relationship with the author of the book on which the movie was based on, his relationship with D.W. Griffith, and so on, runs much more deep than people have acknowledged, and that Wilson himself publicly acknowledged. But that legacy, gave rise to the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan. And we have been trying to untangle ourselves from this for quite some time. So, Wilson's presence is felt everywhere, I'd say, even today.
Yeah, well, I mean that was a striking part of the book. So I'm gonna say a couple of things. I want you to react. Okay, if you look at you mentioned Ronald Reagan. We have approximately 4% of the world's population, 25% of the world's output in terms of the GDP. And so when we sit here over the last 40 years, we've managed to maintain that. I'm going to take the position some of that is related to the architecture that Woodrow Wilson set up during his administration. The federal income tax certainly expanded the power of the United States and the power of the American military, power of the American government to stabilize our economy. The Federal Reserve started under Wilson. There's controversy around the Federal Reserve. Some people don't like it. Other people do like it. But, I'll take the position that we actually needed it, and it's helped to further the reserve currency status of the United States, our Federal Reserve. Am I right about this, or am I missing something, sir?
Well, so the income tax obviously is the flip side of the tariff. And while you can't give Wilson entire credit for the income tax because the 16th Amendment preceded his presidency, you do give him and the Congress that came to Washington with him credit for enacting the first legislation to implement the 16th Amendment. But you have to give Wilson, I think, full credit for wanting to substitute an income tax for the tariff. And the tariff, to that point in American history, had been the source of many different kinds of problems, and would become the source of further problems when Smoot-Hawley passed, after Wilson, and so. Wilson's lifelong opposition as a Southerner, because that was, a classic Southern Democratic position to oppose tariffs, which were really to benefit Northern manufacturers. But he brought that with him to Washington. It was the first thing that he did in his first administration. The first address that he made to Congress was about the tariff and currency reform. And currency reform was really his way of dealing with what William Jennings Bryan had wrought previously. To this extent, Wilson was still a Bourbon Democrat, which he had been while he was a teacher. He had opposed labor unions. He'd opposed the initiative and referendum and a lot of progressive things that he flipped on when he became a politician. But he never did like the soft money approach that William Jennings Bryan had taken, notwithstanding that he put Bryan in his cabinet as Secretary of State. And so the Federal Reserve, ended up being Congress's response to this. And as you say, this has been now a central part of the framework of American government for all the subsequent years. The rest of the world operates along similar parameters with the central bank. And so, these are pillars of the modern world without question. And again, Woodrow Wilson's fingerprints and influence are all over these things.
I just found that, I read Doris Kearns Goodwin's book about Taft and Roosevelt a while back, and I found that this book was like a great compendium to that. It really gave a wonderful exposition of the 20 years of the first 20 years of the American century, if you will, it being the 20th century. Okay, so I have 5 words, sir. I'm going to read out the word. I want to get your reaction. Okay, you tell me the word. I'm going to say the word democracy. You think what?
Democracy is, in popular parlance, the ideal form of government. Representative democracy, republic, other more particularized words, describe our actual system, because, pure democracy is a little bit difficult in nations of hundreds of millions or billions of people. But democracy is, in the Western world, a high form of good when thinking about the structure of governments.
I say the word Congress.
Well, I think of my workplace for many, many years. Yeah, I'm actually quite fond of Congress as an institution. Uh, Mark Twain used to have fun saying that America has no native criminal class except in Congress. It's been a punching bag, throughout American history. Notoriously, people like their congressperson, but hate, Congress as a whole. But Congress, to me, is it's Article 1 of the Constitution for a good reason. It's the centerpiece of our system, and it's what makes it strong. If it were otherwise, if we didn't have this kind of representation, then I think people's faith in government, which is low enough as it stands, would be very difficult to maintain.
President. I say the word president, you think what?
Well, I think of, in the political context, presidents that I've known and worked with and for. And I think of, in the political context again, the opportunity that presidents have to lead the nation. And I think of, a favorite aspect of mine in analyzing the office of President of the United States in our constitutional system, and that is that the president is both head of state and head of government, which distinguishes him or her from other nations' leaders who are one or the other. I think that the head of state job, you think of the king, reading to Britain, during time of war. This is what we all have in common as Britons. This is, why our nation is great. And so on, you appeal to everyone and you stress their commonality and what they all share. Politics is the art of, dividing and conquering. And so a very different job. Those presidents who have understood that they have both roles to play and who know when to switch hats have been much more successful. Those who play politics all the time and can never speak to the nation as a whole, when that's called for, they end up faring much less well.
I'm going to say the word suffrage.
Suffrage is a word that I've had to rewrite many times in presenting this subject to 21st century readers, because we don't talk about suffrage when we talk about voting rights, and that's of course what it means. But when we talk about suffrage, it's a word that takes us back to another time, and of course the time when that was most acutely felt as a national issue was Woodrow Wilson's time, and it was the time when America was really a modern nation in the 20th century, and yet we had this ancient cap on who could vote and participate.
Okay, 2 words, and these are my last words, and you, of course, get the last word. Woodrow Wilson.
Very complicated man. I think his complexities, his contradictions are what make him so interesting to study. He was, a progressive, and yet he wasn't. We think of him as a leader of the progressive movement, mostly because he was the president at the peak of the progressive era, and several of his ideas were quite in accord with what modern progressives can easily embrace. But the things that he also stood for, whether we like it or not, very staunchly, that fly in the face of today's progressive ideals, are shocking to us, and they make us ask, how can this be? How can all of this inhere in one man? And it makes him the source of endless fascination and study.
Yeah, really, really, really true. Amazing man, an amazing time in our history. What's next for you, Chris? What are you going to be doing next?
No, I don't know. I don't know that I can. This book took 14 years of research and writing, so I don't know that I have an ambition to take on a project identical to this. I have several. Simon & Schuster has been a wonderful publisher for me to work with, and I've discussed with them some other projects. But I'm reasonably certain this book came in, I think, at 640 pages, that the next one will be probably less than half that.
Well, it was an awesome read, and I appreciate you writing it. The title of the book is Woodrow Wilson: The Light Withdrawn by Christopher Cox. Christopher, thank you. Chris, thank you very much for being on our show today. Really appreciate it.
I enjoyed very much our discussion. Thanks for inviting me.
I had a biographer on. The guy's name is Christopher Cox, and he wrote a biography of Woodrow Wilson. Did Pop ever talk about Woodrow Wilson or not really?
Well, tell me about him, and maybe you'll come to
He
me.
was the president during the First World War, and he's the one that came up with the concept of the League of Nations.
Oh, no, but he talked about Franklin Roosevelt because he was born on my birthday, and he would tell me how good he was. And he used to say that I was going to be good. He used to be a little wacky because he used to say that I was going to be like him. I had a strong personality.
Well, you
which
definitely.
I think I do, though.
Yes, we do think that you have a strong personality, Ma. We're very well aware of it. Okay, so let me ask you this though: under Woodrow Wilson's reign, the women got the right to vote in the United States. Should women be able to vote?
Of course.
Tell me why.
Because I think I don't, my era, they didn't look as equal as the male. But in today's time, because of things, how they progressed and how intelligent they become, yes, I think they're equal now.
Okay, and so in some ways, women are smarter than men, or not really?
I said equal.
Equal.
Depends on the person. Equal.
Okay.
I think that some men are very, very intelligent. You're a perfect example coming from this house.
Okay.
And people, yes, I think they're equal today. Yes.
All right. Anything else you want to say to your fan base, Ma?
I love my son,
Okay.
and I turned 88 yesterday.
All right. You're doing good though, right? You're moving around pretty good. Most of your friends are in like walkers and wheelchairs and stuff.
But don't say that.
Don't say that. All right, you're moving good,
No,
Ma.
because
Stay
they
out
might
of
hear it.
stay out of the high heels, Ma. Stay off the high heels. All right?
I'm a little bit of a dwarf because I shrunk from the Gleevac's and the age, and I can never stay off the high heels. I'm too vain to stay off it.
Okay.
If I break my neck, if I break my neck, it's meant to happen.
Okay, it's worth it, right? Vein and pain, Ma. All right. I love you, Ma. I'll call you later.
Thank you. I love you very much, baby.
Love you.
Bye.
Hey, thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, here's another one right up here that you might like.
We've seen hell repeat itself continuously. We keep stumbling in that stuff. No matter how much people think that we are advancing, we still see hell. And Gaza, just like Ukraine, is an even stronger argument of hell because there was no real peace ever. It was an arrangement that ultimately just went catastrophic. You see people moving towards, how do we resolve this? And so what sort of compromise will we see? What sort of arrangements? And so the elites at the top level get together and they come up with some solution, which is really a truce. It's not a fundamental getting at the essence of where the local people are intimately involved in the process of peace and resolution of their frictions, but in fact at the highest level trying to stop the killing for a while.
Joining us now on Open Book is General Romeo Dallaire. He's a former Canadian senator. He's a global human rights advocate and, of course, a best-selling author. The title of the book is The Peace, A Warrior's Journey. And General Dallaire, it's an honor to have you on the podcast. You've had a distinguished career in the military, of course, in politics. Before we go into the book, I'd like you to tell our audience a little bit about your background, sir. How did you end up in the military and out to the other side to the political system?
Dad was joined the Army in 1929. And so went overseas, married a Dutch girl. I was born there. We lived in military camps and we had cadets at school. military cadets, and so lived in wartime housing and all. I mean, it doesn't give you much option to looking elsewhere, and so wanted to go to military college and achieve that. In fact, my archives of my work are now at West Point, and then did a military career from there, and really wanted to lead people into operations and to do things and see things get done. And so that's what kept me going all those years.
But despite the fact that you've been in the military, sir, you are a big advocate for peace. You're somebody that believes that the best solutions are diplomatic ones. And this book is a very compelling book. Why did you decide to write this book now?
This is my fourth book, and I wrote at the operational level of war in Shake Hands with the Devil that described the genocide in my command there. I wrote at the tactical level when I wrote They Fight Like Soldiers and Die Like Children, which was on child soldiers, of which I subsequently have continued to work and got an institute in my name. We're working in Africa and Latin America, and now opening up in Asia. Then the third book was Waiting for First Light, which was the fact that I was injured psychologically with the experience of the genocide. So I needed something strategically, and I thought there was a way of getting at this arena of conflict and returning conflicts and mass atrocities and massive abuses of human rights and so on by looking at it from a higher plane. And so it's taken nearly 10 years to pull all these things together and to say that ultimately the aim of the exercise is not for humanity to survive the future, but to thrive, and that means to shape it. And what we've been doing over all this time, even since Westphalia, is we've been satisfying ourselves with truces, but not really looking at the fundamental premises of lasting peace, and peace that makes people able to concentrate on their future, their maximum potential, and with the need to marry or communion with the planet, permit us really to truly thrive. And so with technology, young people highly engaged, women being treated as equals in this male-dominated world where everything has been created by men, all the institutions, women have got to come and influence this whole leadership philosophy and be as equals. We got a chance of pulling this off over maybe the next couple centuries.
I love it, I want you to tell our viewers and listeners who may not remember their European history, what was the Treaty of Westphalia and what was the impact that it had?
In fact, it was an extraordinary treaty that was done after there was 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, and the nation states were not in existence. I mean, it was all a whole bunch of dukes and lords and princes and kings, and you just kept beating the living daylights out of each other under very egocentric and power-seeking leadership, all male-dominated, to gain the best advantage where greed and power dominated. Well, they finally got together in Munster, Germany, and I was one of the annual speakers in the exact room where they signed this thing over 300 years ago. And that's what created the foundations of the nation state, of sovereignty, of, in fact, nations and nationalism. And it proved to be an effective tool, certainly after the reforms of thinking and philosophy of the Italian Renaissance in particular at the end of the 15th century. And so here we get an opportunity to go for lasting peace, and all we find is that people are still at each other's throat for a variety of reasons, and in so doing, we end up by making truces, agreements, but never really looking at the essence of what the frictions created as a determinant for going to slaughtering each other, gaining more opportunities, and in fact, not living in peace, but living with a constant hope that a truce will hold. Well, that means you're always looking at your 6 o'clock to see whenever somebody's going to blow it apart.
So it's an interesting concept because in the book, you basically are saying that peace is not necessarily the absence of war. I guess that's more or less what a truce is. So define peace for us. Tell us what it would mean for us to live in peace.
It's an interest. Your questions are very perspicace because essentially what we finally have been stumbling since the end of the Cold War, where we thought we had peace, which was truly, I mean, there's a perfect example of a truce, with the Russian scenario going on, the Gaza scenario going on, with, in fact, the inability of nations to come together to resolve conflicts and ultimately even prevent them. Your request of what really peace is, it's been moved in the international sphere slowly to human security, right? How does a human being feel secure? The individual human being, and both economically, politically, is in its opportunities of maximizing its potential, and in a world where, in fact, the principle of all humans being human and not one human more human than the other actually becomes a reality, fundamentally through respect and the equal opportunities for all. So in peace, you are actually living without any premise, any structure that could permit frictions that do exist. I'm not negating that, but going to a state where, in fact, they end up in conflict and we continue to, as we've done for millennia, slaughter each other. And so I truly believe that by integrating capabilities of the security dimension, political dimension, diplomatic dimension, nation building, the NGO world, humanitarian side, if we brought all that together into a reinforcing plan, a plan that builds on the synergy of all these different capabilities and disciplines, we could actually strive towards something that will not only prevent a conflict, but actually not only stop a conflict, but actually prevent it. And once we've done that, then we can look into the future and shape it under the premise that we have built a foundation for not only humanity, but also for the planet and humanity to become one, moving to a secure future.
I think it's brilliant, sir, and I appreciate you joining. I want to go into a little bit of what happened in Rwanda, and you saved 32,000 people, negotiating with rebel leaders, trying to get the UN member states and the international media to intervene. Obviously, you felt that you could have saved more if some of your pleas didn't fall on deaf ears. But tell us a little bit about that situation, and then, if you don't mind, sir, I'm going to, as you're talking about that, I want you to talk a little bit about what's going on in the Ukraine and Gaza, because as human beings, these things have the same DNA, sort of, right? In terms of this intransigence and this people stuck in certain positions to the point where they're ready to commit violence towards each other.
Yeah, and let me bring a bit of the book into this also, because we're talking about that. And the whole premise of all this starts with my experience in a catastrophic failure of humanity, where in fact we did not treat all humans as equal. That we decided that sub-Saharan Africans didn't really count, and so nobody wanted to come and take any risks in trying to prevent, let alone stop, an actual genocide. I mean, the slaughter of the million people in 100 days, and 4 million were displaced, all based on an ethic premise of greed and power and not wanting to share power. So, in that context of a country that doesn't have resources, it is a country that simply has a population. It was not deemed worthy of intervention and reinforcement by anybody else, although at the same time in ex-Yugoslavia, if you remember in those days, in the early 90s, we poured 67,000 troops into that, and I couldn't even keep 450 where I was. What really we've been going through is that we've seen hell repeat itself continuously. We keep stumbling in that stuff, no matter how much people think that we are advancing. We still see hell, and Gaza is a perfect example of hell. Just like Ukraine is an even stronger argument for of hell, because there was no real peace ever. It was an arrangement that ultimately just went catastrophic. From there, you see people moving towards, how do we resolve this? And so what sort of compromise will we see? What sort of arrangements? And so the elites at the top level get together and they come up with some solution, which is really, as I said earlier on, a truce. It's not a fundamental getting at the essence of where the local people are intimately involved in the process of peace and resolution of their frictions, but in fact at the highest level trying to stop the killing and for a while. So that's purgatory, and that's in fact the part of the book. And so Gaza is a sort of a purgatory that's turned into hell, because what we've created is a generational war. It's a war that's guaranteeing that the generations that are young, the young people and so on, how they've been used, abused, and destroyed, what they've seen, what's left, what the opportunities that don't exist anymore, they are going to move again towards the conflict and the use of force. And so you're going to keep building generational wars with periods of times where you have a sort of arrangement that makes the high level people satisfied, and the general populations don't have to duck so much. But we don't then move to something far more draconian, where in fact we want to cross and go through this ring of fire that Dante does into heaven, which he then still has to work at, to actually see the options of what does peace really mean, and what is the cost of it to implement it, and what is needed to be done, and the perseverance and the ability to sustain the will that humanity seeks to find that element that will give them the sense of permanence, of serenity for them and future generations. And if they can get into that situation, then they can stop worrying about how to defend themselves and start, in fact, blossoming into building a whole of humanity, which we can now Skype nearly, in a time where that has never existed before. In real time, we could actually pull all this humanity together, and with the synergy of it, actually go not only into a mode of peace and lasting peace, but also of going beyond ourselves. Going actually beyond this planet. Because once we have this lasting peace, what do we do with it? We actually could thrive into the universe. And that's fundamentally what humanity is seeking. So I do not believe in the Darwinian perception of power and strongest, and as Kissinger has sold, go to the negotiation, for peace, but bring a big stick. Power, greed, all those components of ego, particularly male-dominated ego, even misogyny, have all been factors that have prevented people from sitting around and looking at fundamental peace. And unless women are in there at 100% with men to reconstitute those institutions that have been built by them, religions, governments, the social networks, construct of economic network, that we have women traits and abilities and leadership into the future, we will never really grasp the depth of what peace can be. But there is a shining light behind all this. And only what it is that the millennials, the A's, the Z's, they can see globally. They're already global with the communications and so on. And they are hypersensitive of this need for communion with the humanity and the planet. And they're going to start pushing the other generations above them aside because we're too slow and inept at bringing the innovative solutions to actually move to peace and not be satisfied with truces.
It's very, very well said, sir. I really appreciate it. So we went through your book. We come up with 5 words for every one of our authors. So what I'm going to do, it's a little bit of a word association. I'm going to say the word that's out of your book, and then I want you to give me a 1 or 2 sentence reaction to the word.
Well,
Okay,
that's
you
going
ready?
to be a challenge, that's for sure.
All right, so you ready?
Yeah.
No, I'm sure you're up for the challenge, General. Okay, ready? I'm going to say the word leadership. What comes to mind?
Leadership, humility, and the fundamental premise that you respect other human beings, and through that, you maximize your potential to be able to move the ambitions of all towards a positive result.
See, when I read your book and I thought of the word leadership, I always thought service. I see you as a servant leader. You're somebody that likes serving people. So despite the fact that you're in a leadership position, you're always out there trying to help people.
Well, my dad told me the night I left for military college, and he had, he was a World War II vet and a career soldier, and he said, Romeo, remember, he said, you're joining a service. Don't join if you expect people to say thank you, but remember you're there to serve them.
Amen. All right, ready?
Yeah.
Next word is warrior. I say the word warrior. You say what?
If you had asked me that 30 years ago, it would have been the warrior ethic and the ability to maximize power and to discipline use of power in order to achieve the missions that are given to us from a democratic elected government. That would have been my sort of work. And my love for the Templars and the Crusaders comes from the fact that they were warriors, but they had another ambition also. They were humanitarian, trying to help people. The Templars, the Hospitaliers, and so on. They saw something more than to be a knight and a warrior. Today, to me, a warrior is someone who, yes, can use disciplined force in extremists, but there is a whole margin of capabilities that are inculcated into the military structure, the ethos of the military, its doctrine, its philosophy of leadership, that can help it move in synergy with other disciplines like the NGOs, the humanitarians, the diplomats, in building a new construct of how we solve problems and anticipate them versus the stovepipe systems that we have today. So warrior is, in extremis, warrior ethic may be required. However, there's a whole, not to be too vulgar, piss pot of elements that can be done and can be accomplished by the security forces in synergy with the other disciplines.
Okay. I say the word humanity.
Humanity, we are living in an extraordinary time because we can actually really communicate with the whole of humanity. So when we talk humanity, we have humanity as a state of mind, of philosophy, of being an empathy for other human beings. That's the sense of humanity. But humanity, in the way I've been articulating, particularly in the book a lot, is the fact that we can bring the whole of the human race in respect with each other as equals, all humans being human and equal, into a whole new framework of how we seek the guidance of evolving our situation into lasting peace.
What about the word war? I say the word war.
Yeah, war. Um, you know, war war is the most evil deficiency of humanity. War to me is the weakness of humanity to bring innovative solutions and be conscious of what, in fact, ultimately the aim of being alive and serene and safe means. So, war is the easiest way to find some sort of a compromise or some sort of a solution, but ultimately, a war has absolutely no lasting peace to it. A war, on the contrary, is an instrument to destroy humanity and to perpetuate the frictions that exist.
Okay, how about peace?
Peace is the ultimate aim. Peace is the reason why all these human beings are on this planet, because we are not they're here on this planet to survive the planet and the universe and so on. We're on this planet to thrive. We have been given extraordinary capabilities that we haven't barely touched upon, that we can in synergy move us beyond this planet. And so I believe that peace is the ultimate aim to move us beyond ourselves. And that can be achieved if we create a communion with the planet and truly, truly feel serene and safe in a lasting environment to concentrate on a much higher plane objective for all of us.
Well, listen, sir, it's been fascinating to interview you. It's been an honor for me to have you on Open Book, our podcast. The title of the book is The Peace, A Warrior's Journey, sort of a brilliant rendition of what that book is about from General Romeo Dallaire. He is a former Canadian senator, a global humanitarian, and obviously a military leader that all of us are very proud to know. Thank you very much for joining us today on Open Book.
Well done, Tony, and excellent questions. Congratulations.